My guest today is Lisa Robinson, who has seamlessly navigated diverse industries from startups to nonprofits and Forbes 100 companies. As a CEO of OnBoard, Lisa has championed gender diversity on corporate boards, tripling the organization's revenue and program impact. Lisa's journey began with the rhythm of a musician, but over time, she orchestrated a career of meaningful connections, empowering women and driving change through innovative leadership. Without further ado, let's dive into Lisa's story, uncovering the purpose, discovery, and growth that have guided her along the way. A very warm welcome to Atlanta Diaries, Lisa. I'm so excited to celebrate your journey because just a few seconds before that, you, without realizing, said that you only bring spotlight to other women and not to yourself.
Thank you for having me. Really, I feel honored, especially listening to other guests that you've had on your podcast.
Absolutely, Lisa. So let's get started. Lisa, I see this amazing portrait in your backdrop. Tell us a little bit about what's the story behind it.
Well, we were at a benefit, my husband and I, and Boomershine is the artist because one of my daughters is an actor in New York, and she played Dorothy as a young girl, and it was honestly one of the joys of my life. Of course, always watching your own succeed in that way and bring joy to others. And so when I saw it, and I love what he put on there is "There's no place like home" on the necklace she has. And so I just liked it so much. And I talked my husband into getting it. And he said, "You said this would be an investment piece." And he keeps coming back to me and saying, "Do you know how much these are?" I said, "That was just at the purchase. This is not to ever sell."
Of course.
That's for people who believe that it's an investment pair of shoes. You're not selling the shoes.
Such a good perspective. And from here, I think it's a obvious segue into exploring your own journey because clearly arts and creativity is in the blood, for lack of a better word, right? So,
Yeah.
you started your own career as a musician. So tell us about that early chapter. What inspired it and how did it shape the person you are today?
Yes. Well, I started playing piano when I was 4, and my parents always had season tickets to the Cleveland Orchestra and then later to the Chicago Symphony. And George Zell was the conductor in Cleveland. And at one point, Leonard Bernstein, I was a young child, came and he would teach young people all about the orchestra. And he selected a young boy to come up and use the baton and conduct the symphony. And I was so jealous. And I wanted to do that, to think that you control things. And at the time, of course, women, at least in the US, are, I think, less than 10% leaders of orchestras. And so, like so many different sectors, who knew that would be, something for the future and lead me to think about that later on. But it was just a start. And I enjoyed music so much, but I was not destined to be a professional long term, that's for sure.
In hindsight, why do you make that comment? Like, what was the reason why you transitioned out of it and recognized that it's not a profession, probably just a passion?
Well, the truth was, I was a conducting major and I couldn't even say I was average, being very candid. And I don't know if people realize so many musicians are introverts. You spend a lot of time by yourself when you're a musician. I really wasn't cut out for it.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think back and, gosh, should I have studied music? But when I was in college, people weren't planning as much for their future. They were not choosing their studies depending on where they were going to go. And so later on, it just came that I realized that my father did not want me to be a musician as a career. And he really got down to the nuts and bolts of money and said, just look at it from this perspective. I think he always had regrets that they had sold their family business. He said, you would have been a great CEO for that. Anyway, so it was a natural transition at the time, but it still has brought me a lot of joy.
Actually, today, when you talked about the symphony, it reminded me of the beautiful opportunity my husband and I, where we went to Harvard And Lisa, one of my fondest memories of that program is that we learned leadership lessons from the Boston Symphony. You know, the banter, the camaraderie, the way they were
Yes.
chatting with each other, joking with each other. Even if it sounds utopic, I was like, wow, imagine if these things went to the real world, how much
Yep.
more people would not just succeed, but even thrive, right?
Yes. And yet it is so competitive.
Hmm.
So, what a gift for the people who get there. And that's what they love.
So true. Having said that, share with me some lessons you believe this chapter taught you and you carry them till today.
Well, I don't know if I carried it that well, but a lot of it to be humble.
Mm.
And same thing, I don't think I let you know this, but I did stand-up comedy for quite a while.
Really?
And I think about one of my daughters who's the actor. You can really bomb in one way or another. And it is personal when you're the one up there. And not everyone is going to love you, just like in business.
Yeah.
We all have favorites, and we've mentioned perfection before. And I just think people are not perfect. And so if you let go of that feeling, and particularly maybe as women, when we replay something we said or something that we did that was not right, or we performed to our own expectations, to let go of that, because it really does, it's not helping us.
Any anecdotes come to your mind, Lisa, when you share such profound perspective lessons?
Well, I think about one, and this is years and years ago on a government board. And I really was young in my career, and I needed guidance. And as some people will attest, early on, there really were no mentors per se. You thought of your mentor as maybe your boss, because they were the ones giving you direction in some ways. But I can just remember my boss, the CEO, and after this very important board meeting, and he said, "You talk a lot." And I tell you, I just went back to my room, and that's one of those that I have replayed in my head. And the lesson there, to me, yes, I talk a lot, have to watch that then, obviously, through my career, but also not to hurt somebody in that way. And I think it's still out there, but fewer than years ago.
Hmm.
It was a lesson learned, I would say.
So he could have said it, but he could have said it from a place of empathy.
You could say, "Could I share something with you for you to just think about in the future?" And you may not be aware, but, coming through it, that you're both kind of solving something together.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, if I had to, somebody on my team, I'd say, "Are you open to receiving some feedback?"
Hmm.
That's the first thing. And generally, people say yes, but it immediately at least puts them in the ready position, if you will.
That's a very, very profound leadership lesson, which we take for granted. And when you replay it, you realize how powerful it is.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it is.
Sure. Lisa, you've navigated very diverse industries,
Mm.
professions. So you think you can share, just some quick headlines of your journey so that we can double click on that and, sort of start talking about it?
Certainly. Well, a big piece for me was moving from New York to Atlanta. And I did that because I was married to someone who was moved by Time Magazine. It was, great opportunity, but we honestly were newlyweds. And I had a great job in New York. I loved everything about my life. And my immediate reaction was, I don't want to go. And again, my father at the time, who was the most gentle man, and he said, "Well, you have to go." He said his career is more important than yours. And he was looking at it from a financial perspective, which I agree. He was making more money. And I said, "Well, we thought we might commute." And he said, "Oh, you don't want to commute." And I said, "Well, I didn't mean I would commute. I meant he would commute, going back and forth." But we did not do that. And I came to Atlanta. And I think what that taught me is about being creative, because I went to the company and I asked them if I could open up a Southeast division. And they allowed me to do that. And I worked from home. It's really serendipity. I traveled a lot, But then I had children, and those kinds of things can make life so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a young person with other offices like Texas and LA, reporting to me. And honestly, I really was not equipped as a leader to do that. So there was a lot of learning to do, but it was the kind of learning that you do from experience. And so it was a wonderful opportunity, and I'm glad I had that. And I made a lot of my decisions over family. And I really never regret that, because once you have in your head what priorities or the order, and then you make the best of all the other opportunities that you have that come your way. And it worked out.
Mm-hmm. And from there, the startups happened.
The startups were early on, and I would say I recommend that for younger people,
Mm-hmm.
because one is maybe you don't have a family yet, which was in my situation, but also you are learning so much and about a lot of things that you maybe never would have the exposure to if you were in corporate and in one office and in one area of the company. And the startups had a lot of visibility, I would say. Like the CEO, he was on the Today Show back then, when that was something that you aspired. I mean, that kind of publicity and out there. And I think what it did was it gave me the opportunity, again, as a young woman, to be at the very highest level. I was always working with CEOs, whether it was a lot of manufacturers of activewear. So that really opened my eyes to quite a few things. We went and we were trying to sell the company. So I was the one presenting to 3M. I mean, those are big stages. So I think the startups, aside from where people think that there might be a lot of money to be made, which can be true, it also is a very fast education.
Mm.
And then Cotton Incorporated was just a wonderful and international opportunities, which I appreciated, and realized I needed to be in Atlanta more at the time. And that's when I went over to a nonprofit and started that different kind of journey altogether.
Awesome.
But again, one I have enjoyed very much.
So there was a lot of on-the-job learning and a lot of hands-on learning rather than formal training.
It definitely was. And I think there is a little theme now that we talk about it, that I was frequently, I guess you'd call, managing people who were much older than I. And I'm not saying I was great at that, because I wasn't, but you certainly learn a lot by doing so, or looking back on it and thinking, gosh, I really wasn't great at that. Or if I'd been the person I was managing, I might be a little annoyed, but overall it worked out.
So how did you earn that, figurative seat at the table at such a young age?
Well, it's funny with Cotton, where I ended up having people in different offices who were older than I, and I was supervising them as well. And I think I had earned that role because I was delivering on all the goals that were set before me. And I had a mindset, of course I would win, whatever it was. In fact, this is a little bit embarrassing to share. I hope no one from Cotton ever hears this. But when I first started, I went to this big international meeting that the company would hold. I mean, literally, I'd been there 2 weeks. And the CEO started talking, and I had worked for him at one of the startups, and that's how I ended up there. And he started talking about this Malcolm Bridge, this Eagle Award that they were going to give, and went on about how great this person was. And I literally started to flush, because I thought, this is going to be embarrassing that I win this award when I had just started. And of course, I wasn't winning the award, but in my head, I really thought I might.
I love it.
I can't explain it. I would never think that today, but that just shows that who I was at the moment was always thinking positively.
It sounds like you've really evolved as a person. You were really evolved as a leader. So, I sort of really want to unpack your journey of growth from a Lisa perspective and from a leader perspective.
Well, you are absolutely right. I think I've changed dramatically over the years. And again, I definitely was not perfect. And I made a commitment to later in life to never fib or lie in any facet of my life. I just decided it's so much easier.
Yeah, so true.
And so that was an absolute and has been for me. And two more things. One is about being transparent with anyone on my teams so that they know what I know, unless it truly is confidential for someone. But giving and sharing that knowledge empowers them and puts you really all on the same playing level. So being transparent is critical to me. And then the last piece, and I don't know that I've quite mastered this, but I hope I've at least improved, is about tone. I know my tempo is a little bit fast for some people. And so my patience or impatience or whatever it might be. But the tone, sometimes I would hear myself and say, "Ah, why did I say it like that? I didn't mean to say it like that." You know how people will say texting, oh, people might not understand. Back then, I probably would have been better texting than with my tone of voice, which can really upset people, or if nothing else, shut them down.
Mm.
So I think those are the biggest things that over time I have hopefully learned and am doing better.
Thank you for sharing that. It's funny, you and I have spent probably few meetings now together,
Yes.
and I can't imagine what you're saying was your past.
You know, just to add on, and I think this happens a lot with it, I think it was tied to ego.
Mm.
That sharing the information means that you don't know more than they know.
Mm.
And some people look at the information as power.
Yeah.
And so I think letting that go and having everyone in on it uh, is better.
Let's shift gears, Lisa, and I'd love to talk about your transition into the nonprofit world, right?
Yeah.
Given my association with Jay Vakil and
Yes.
working as a team coach, I see that as as great that people cross over to the not-for-profit world, but I also see them navigating a lot of different challenges. So, did you face any challenges and how did you navigate them?
Gosh. Well, I will say when I first started, and it was, a Catholic school, independent but Catholic school, and I had been here, I don't know, a long time in Georgia, but there still was a bias of what someone called a Yankee. An older alumni wrote to his son, who is also an alum, and he thought he was writing to him, but he sent it to me. And he just said, Lisa Robinson is a brash 43-year-old Yankee who thinks she's running everything, something along those lines.
Mm.
And I did not respond. And immediately I thought, he's unhappy. I'm not going to take this personally. And I reported to a priest, which is, again, different than what I'd been used to. And I loved him. I absolutely loved him. And I sent it to him and to no one else because I didn't want to propagate it in any way. And I just said, I'm 41, not 43. And that was all I wanted to clear up about that. I might have been brash. I was a Yankee. I was doing things to the school. But the point, I think, was not to make a big deal of it and to realize it's not always about you, even though it seems that it is.
Mm.
And to remember, we all make those email mistakes sometimes and go, I
Yeah.
want to recall that email. But anyway, I think the bigger challenge at times for people, and I've obviously hired a lot of people also in the nonprofit world, is that they feel respected because we do need to pay our nonprofit teams, employees appropriately because they are working hard and they're working hard for a cause, but it doesn't mean that they don't also need, a car, insurance, a house, whatever it might be. And that, I think, is part of the respect that should go along with it.
Can't agree with you more on that. I've had so many conversations with the CEO and I where we talk about how can we pay our teams better because funds are less, but the reality is they're working much harder probably than somebody in the corporate world or the for-profit.
Yes, because there probably are fewer employees to do the work. And one of the ways we sometimes got around that would be either bonuses, depending how the budget ended, but also, maybe they get more days off, things that could make up for it in some way, and to acknowledge that the work is important, because generally you're going to think that people are working for a mission which they believe in.
Also, how do you feel, the for-profit culture was different from the many nonprofits you work for now?
Well, I think with larger nonprofits, so maybe not the startup types, they are structurally, they're more sound. And depending on their board, I think a big way would depend on the board. One difference is that at the nonprofit, you can feel as if you have many, many bosses with a board.
Yeah.
Because, that the board is very interested generally. And so in some ways, it's similar to corporate board work in that hopefully you don't have them really telling you what to do, but guiding or looking out for you in certain ways, or certainly making introductions, those kinds of things. And maybe they have an expertise if you've got somebody in IT on your board, that sort of thing. But overall, that part of it can be challenging because you always want to drop everything for a board member. That's just a natural inclination.
Very interesting. Yeah. That you're not reporting to just one person, you actually have multiple bosses, for lack of a better.
Right. You absolutely do.
How did you sort of then navigate that understanding, or how did you really make peace with it?
Honestly, at the time, I just did it. And I will say at most, not all, but most of the nonprofits where I worked had wonderful boards, really people you would want to get to know, and that you're privileged to spend time with them. And what's funny, might not sound great, but the more business people you had on the board, actually, the better it was. Because they were maybe more efficient, or they knew what was possible, and certainly had the ability to make connections. I found that was easier. Maybe just because that's who I had worked with the most in my life.
People who gravitate towards the nonprofit are obviously people with a certain kind of EQ.
Yep.
And the people from the for-profit are probably a little more
Yeah.
objective. So it just allows you to take decisions more objectively, and that really helps make the organization more efficient.
It does. You're right.
Lisa, shifting gears, empowering women is like a highlight of your career now. And you also spoke about, championing initiatives like starting a golf tournament.
Yeah.
So it's such a novel concept. So, tell us more about it.
Well, I've really felt honored to help women get on corporate boards and to just help them in the overall journey. And I've played golf all my life. And early on, I would frequently be one of only a few, or maybe the only one in corporate golf tournaments, which didn't bother me. But what you realize is what's going on the golf course. I mean, people are making friendships, relationships, they're sharing confidences. The men are, and we potentially missing out. Not to mention the joy of being out, on a beautiful golf course and being with friends and getting some exercise, different things. I love that part. And so it doesn't have to be that you need to be this spectacular golfer, because actually most people are not. And I don't want to say typical of women, but not unusual that women think that they need to go out and be great at it. One of my friends, and she's on one of our boards, and she said, yeah, I tried it. She was part of a club, and she said, I wasn't that good at it. So she doesn't like to do anything that she's not good at doing. And so what I try and share with people is that everybody in golf was a beginner once. And if you just envision that everybody was that way, that's just how everybody had to be there. So I wanted to open up this world for women, not necessarily they're going to go out and play every weekend, but when they're invited to play in some corporate thing or a scramble where you just have to go up and hit and everybody goes to the best ball, Well, they could participate and feel comfortable because a lot of the importance is just moving, it's knowing the rules, and you learn a lot about people, about their character, or if somebody cheats, or if somebody is whiny about their grade. There are all kinds of things you can pick up. And so we do a clinic. I bring in LPGA players to teach, and hopefully some women who are also good. And some have shared how now they play all the time with their father and husband. So I think it's a positive. It's just, there are a lot of ways to connect with people. And that's really what's important for women, I think, at all levels to recognize. And people talk about networking. Well, then networking gets, kind of a bad vibe to it. But you do want to build your network. And it can just be making these important relationships and ones where you're comfortable enough maybe to call someone, because people aren't always open to calling, and to have these conversations that are meaningful. And years ago, a friend of mine who then ended up hiring me somewhere invited me to a group of women, just a little like cocktail party, just to meet people you didn't know. And from there, I just took that, and I've had many dinners at my home or a cocktail party somewhere else, or I want to introduce women to other women who they otherwise would not know, different ages, different backgrounds, because it's opening your world and creating your own network. You're not going to hit it off with everybody, but you might have one really important relationship there. And I feel like that is going to keep helping us as we go to the future.
Lisa, I was smiling as I was listening to you. So on January 1st, my husband and I spent 2 hours going through like a little fun exercise about reflecting and what's next and so on and so forth. And after that, he and I went for a long walk. And it's just silly me who in the end said, okay, let's discuss two things which we both want each other to change.
Oh, gosh.
And he was refusing to say anything, but that it might just come back to bite him. And I'm like, okay, I'll go first. And I gave him two, three things which come easily. And a minute later, he says, I want you to start golf with me. Right. And it's funny. I hope he doesn't listen to this conversation. But
What was your reaction?
so my sons and my husband and my father-in-law, my brother, everybody plays golf in the family. And my mother-in-law used to too. So for a change, I didn't react in a negative way. I'm like, okay, let me think about it.
Yes.
But today, after listening to you, I always joke with him. You don't know how to give perspectives. And he says, give me a script. So today, I think I need to tell him this is a script you need to use when you're telling me to play golf.
I think you should fly to Atlanta for our April 28th golf event. People have a gas out there. They're laughing. And one thing I think about for women is they're trying to excel and get into those real leadership positions and get on boards, is that I'm not saying all at all, but a lot of those men play golf.
Yeah,
And we need men in our corner.
absolutely. Without a doubt.
We're not going to do it just on our own. I'm excited. I'm going to be checking in on this.
Thank you. It's funny. I think every podcast inspires me as much as it inspires my other listeners. So today, the big takeaway is okay, I think we need to try and commit to it at least. I'm not going to say more than that.
Oh gosh, that's great. That makes me so happy. Okay, good.
Lovely. Multiple times in the conversation, you've sort of touched upon perfection. And I want to unpack this because I can see it's something which is almost like one of your mantras.
It must be. And it's funny because I think I probably might have been a little bit that way with my own girls, but I hope not. Because I think when you focus and believe me, I like things that are right. I want the house clean, I want the event to go right, whatever it is. But when we're focusing so much on perfection, we're missing the bigger picture.
Mm.
So you could apply it to so many things in your everyday. When you start the day and you're thinking, I've got these 3 big things, or for the week that I want to tackle. And when you get, which I do sometimes, bogged down going through your emails or making sure everything's right before I can really focus and do this. I mean, start with really thinking of what's most important to you and thinking that way about your children or your partner or whatever it might be, because focusing only on that perfection and maybe saying to your partner, oh, but we didn't do this instead of this was great, then we're missing it. In the same way that I think about on social media, and I'm only on LinkedIn, and even that can sometimes be not perfect, just say. But you look at how people try and make their posts so perfect, but to keep honing in then on what is not perfect, then you're not releasing and getting excited about what is great. So that's why I just think imperfection can eat up some time as well.
And be very exhausting, not just for you yourself, but sometimes for your team.
Absolutely. And when you're focusing on all those great things, it doesn't have to be what you did that was great. It can be thinking about how somebody else did something and you're so happy for them and letting it go. That's just my 2 cents on perfection.
So again, I want to talk about the different women you're working with at OnBoard now.
Yeah.
And this is probably coming from now the mission of Atlanta Diaries, where together we are trying to create that platform for the women to empower them and enable them. So
Yeah.
what patterns have you noticed and how do you support them in discovering their potential?
Yeah. I also have noticed women who do not want to promote themselves. I'll just put it in that way. That they, I've had many who have been CMOs who have gone through our OnBoard program, the accelerator program, and it's teaching you how to be able to share what you would bring to a board or whatever the situation might be. And here are these women who absolutely know what they can do and could tell anything. They would be able to sell you in a nanosecond, but are unable to do so about themselves. And one reason I think we were taught early on not to brag.
Yep.
And I don't know about your culture. Was there anything like that? Would you ever talk about yourself or?
Not at all. In the Indian culture, the minute you open your mouth, your mom tells you, okay, now relax.
Oh, yeah.
There's no need to make a big deal about it.
That is funny. Well, what my mother used to say, just bring something back. She would always say to me, now it doesn't have to do with not bragging, but she'd say, modulate. And now my husband, who has worn hearing aids since he was 8, and he's always saying, why are you whispering? I'm sorry, but I've been told all my life to modulate, like tone it down, be quiet. But anyway, our mothers stick with us, don't they?
You bet they do. And or what is funny is that I'm now seeing reverse mentoring. So I think I'm unlearning a little bit because, now our kids are part of a different generation. And the other day, my younger son is telling me that, maybe you need to put yourself out there and allow us to put ourselves out there and talk
Yes.
about us as having done something worthwhile.
Yes.
So
That's funny that it's your son who is saying that. That's very interesting. That is one trend I absolutely see is the women who are maybe potentially at the age where they're thinking about getting on a board. And many of those, because they started their career at a particular time, have been on one particular company, let's say, and have not moved. And if I'm going back now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but boards and maybe even employers, they want some diversity. So when you think about if I were talking to someone younger, you don't necessarily need to stay with one company for so long, which years ago people did.
yes.
But then you don't know other sectors necessarily. You might have been pigeonholed into one area. You also only know the teams within your own company.
Sure.
So you have not been working and collaborating. Maybe you haven't been with a team that's all men, for example, or whatever it might be. So I would say diversifying your own experiences is one of the things, depending on the age that I see. Then you get some much younger women who have moved around a lot, bumping up. Maybe they might want to show a little more loyalty.
Yeah.
I hate
So, Lisa, as we sort of come towards the end of the conversation, which was absolutely amazing, I would love to share with you a little bit about my learnings.
Yes.
In 2 years, we've completed 75 conversations.
I know. And when I was looking through, I said, that's a lot.
Thank you. So, one, of course, is that I feel women are all the time seeking approval, perhaps due to the social conditioning,
Yep.
right? So, I'd love to sort of understand your perspective on this. And how do you think, if you agree with me, then can we shift this narrative?
I would agree, especially with the ones who are earlier in mid career,
Yeah.
which, I understand, but I think when you get someone who's uh, older, being more mature, I mean, from that positive perspective, they're not necessarily looking for the same approval, but they do want a lot of communication, is what I have noticed. For example, with our team, because people get so many emails,
Yeah.
I say, let's just all agree that we appreciate each other. And unless we need to acknowledge the email, we don't need to celebrate in our little group because it produced so many.
More work.
And I think once you know that you're close enough that you can just say, I appreciate. But in general, maybe it's about lowering expectations for that approval
Mm.
and that thinking in your own mind that you've done a good job. You know that you did good work, let's say. It doesn't always have to be the best work. It doesn't have to be the A plus work always. Now, I know a lot of people are probably out there saying, yep, she didn't get into Harvard for sure. But you did good work. And this goes back to my perfection thing.
Yeah.
This one, report absolute perfection, or do you want to be able to answer 5 different customers with XYZ and effectively? And so I think a lot of that approval might need to come from within.
Yep, yep. This is that imposter syndrome or that self-doubt which keeps coming back, right?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that, yeah, you have to take control of it and make
Yes.
yourself secure and hmm.
It comes from within and knowing what you've done. Now, I think it's hard making comparisons. And that's really a lot of times what it is thinking that someone else has done a better job or has a better education or knows more people or whatever it might be. And the comparisons, I think, are what hurt us.
Yeah,
It's kind of self-inflicted, though.
very true. Absolutely. And I mean, I often say this to all my clients that I think the only person who can put us under stress is we ourselves. And therefore, we only have to get us out of it.
Yes.
Lisa, again, going back to the 75 Atlanta I've spoken with, like last week, I had this amazing conversation with Denise,
Yes.
who is a thought leader in the space of gender equity, Devika Bulchandani, who is the global CEO of Ogilvy, right?
Yes.
And I think you and I spoke about it as well. So, that there are these unspoken codes which are deeply ingrained, and women, in a sense, have really had to adapt to these codes, right? And now there is a need that we redefine these codes. So, what steps do you think are necessary, therefore, to redefine these codes to make a more equal and inclusive future?
One of my first feelings on this is that I want people to want to have, say, the changes on their board, as an example, about gender. So when I first started on board, and I can remember in an interview, and she said, do you think this should become law? Because remember, out in California, they had the law. I said, I don't like that.
Mm.
I want it to come from within. I want someone to recognize while they're making a decision that it would behoove us, and it's factual, the bottom lines. It also helps the women in your organization. If they see female leadership at the top, then that is what is going to encourage them to do better themselves. But I want it to come in a very organic way and not because someone signed a law.
Mm.
The people who were very supportive of DEI or who have been, for the most part, I think those are the people who are going to continue no matter what. When they were being true, when they said we want a diverse board, they're going to continue with that because they know the value. But it really is challenging to go and be the token person, whatever that one is. And we know how strong it is when you have a power of three or more women on the board and people have a voice. Even Malcolm Gladwell in his recent book wrote about that now and quoted a Harvard study on that, which is something that we've known for years because your OnBoard has been tracking it for 33 years about how many women on the boards. And now we have 8 that are gender parity just in Georgia alone on these public boards. And remember, there are fewer and fewer public boards because for a variety of reasons, some are going private, many are consolidating. There are all kinds of reasons for that. But I just want it to come naturally. It's kind of like I wouldn't want to date someone who wasn't attracted to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
I don't want to force myself on you. You're missing it right here. So, and I'm married, so I wouldn't be dating someone.
Yeah. So I hear you, Lisa. But the other perspective is also that as a CEO, sometimes you create these processes or rules to mindfully start bringing women in the conversation or giving them a seat at the table.
Yes.
What happens, therefore, is when you start doing it, there's a proof of concept and then it percolates down.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that we work to do is to keep showing people that we have these excellent female candidates that who would not want them?
Want them. Yeah.
Another kind of trend, if you will, that you just see is that the women come prepared. The whole role of a person on a corporate board, whether it's private or public, is that there's so much more now to do. There were years where it was almost more rubber stamping and it was just so friendly and less reading, etc. Well, there's a lot you have to do on a public board, as witness how many end up, under duress with somebody trying to come in and take over or change the makeup of the board. So I think the more we get the women on there and they're excellent candidates, they are the proof in the pudding, if you will.
Yeah. It's like a chicken and egg story. What comes first?
You're right. And we just keep trying because it is going to happen. You can't give up.
While I completely agree, you can't force somebody to do it or twist somebody's arm to do it.
Well, you can, but I don't think it's as effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree on that. But I'm also wondering that, in certain sectors, when the culture of having women is not there at all, and you want to show them a different way of doing this, right? And only when you show them a different way, they will realize the value of it. So how do you redefine that code? How do you, without making it compulsory or without mandating it? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think the way to go about that is to show them the data, because I think ultimately, what do they want? They want money.
Yeah.
Even if it meant giving up some of their power, they do better when the company does better. So think about the typical CEO and how much their compensation is based on hitting these metrics. And those boards could certainly fold in those metrics, and they have, about diversity in there. But the biggest and the ones that they're used to delivering on are financial. And so if you do have a diverse board, it's proven that the company's more successful financially. And so that should really be their answer. I would have these interviewers come in for something we do. It's called Get On Board, kind of a speed dating with great candidates who we had. And they would say, gosh, I had no idea there were this many good women candidates. Because usually when they would come in, they'd say, I would love to put a woman on my board. I can't find any, that qualify. They're just not looking because they are there.
Yeah, it's a blind spot. I think they don't know any better.
That's right.
Exactly. I really like that perspective. Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. This was great. Thank you so much for all your insights and sharing all your learnings.
Well, you were generous to have me on with your audience. Thank you very much. And I can't wait to see you at our golf tournament. And it's not, the first part is not a tournament, remember. It's just the clinic part. Not everybody plays in the golf tournament.
I am actually going to think about
I like
it.
that answer.
I like it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do hang on for just one more minute. I have a request for you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Atlanta Diaries on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you follow. Do join us in our mission to empower and inspire by sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It will be great if you can share on the social media platforms you follow, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any other. Please leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Lastly, I wanted to share with you that many of my coaching clients and listeners have created a cheat sheet with their key takeaways from the episodes. I invite you to consider jotting down 1 or 2 key takeaways as you navigate your amazing journey. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.